Hey guys, Jason here. So I've been annoyed lately, with my pedal board. Yes, the same pedal board that I recently did a video on, the same pedal board that I've been using consistently for close to 3.5 years now. So I love this pedal board. It was built by hand by my friend Donnie out of his shop, Tone Snob Pedalboards. It's a great board. The problem is it's too big and it's too heavy. This thing weighs 47 pounds and I carry it with one hand by a cowboy leather strap. Frankly, I'm not getting any younger, and I've mentioned before I have eczema in my hands, so it's just not fun moving this board from place to place, but that's exactly what I'm doing all the time. So I need a solution. Fortunately, I got a package in the mail last week. So this is my new pedal board. It's a 24x16 Aero board from Creation Music Company. It's thin and lightweight, but still has great strength and rigidity. I also got a matching riser for the back row of pedals and a flight case with a built-in trolley, so it's super convenient for transporting. So I got this board for a few reasons. I was testing out new pedal board layouts on pedalplayground.com, and this was one of the boards that was built natively into the editor. I like the slotted surface. Like the pedal train pedal boards, you can easily route cables underneath. It's not as wide, but it has more depth than my old pedal board, the result of which being with the riser, I can actually fit all of my pedals plus one extra pedal on an overall smaller pedal board. Isn't geometry fun? The other reason I got this particular model is I've never used a flat pedal board before. All my previous boards have been angled, and I'm curious to see if I'll love it or hate it or feel the exact same way about it. We'll see. So just the board and the flight case before I put any pedals on it come in at under half the weight of my old board. So if I can lose even just a few pounds off of the overall weight of my pedal board, that would be awesome. But even if not, just the fact that it's slightly smaller and it has built-in wheels is unquestionably worth the investment. So what you're going to see now is some overhead time-lapse footage of me taking apart my old pedal board and assembling the new one. I'll try to explain what I'm doing along the way, so this is educational, but as always, the comments down below are open if you have any questions. So it's 11 a.m. right now. I've got pretty much the rest of my day cleared off to work on this, but I've got other stuff that needs my attention the rest of this week, and I need this board this weekend for a gig, so that means I've pretty much got one day to finish this. Otherwise, I'm going to be stealing some late night hours later this week. So let's get to work. First, we have to disassemble the old pedal board. I'm pulling up all these pedals, going to clean them, check everything, and apply new dual lock to the bottom. I'm going to try to salvage as much cabling as possible, definitely reusing the same Midi cables because the spacing amongst my pedals that are connected via Midi will remain the same. Going to reuse as many of these power cables as I can, permitting that they're long enough. I'm going to end up replacing most of the audio plugs because I have the smaller square plugs to use on this board, but I'm willing to bet a lot of this audio cable is still perfectly usable. So the most important part of cleaning the pedals is using this Deoxit D5 solution. It's a contact cleaner for getting dust and dirt and anything else that might get into the ports of your pedals that can lead to scratchy noises or bad connections and whatnot. So I spray it in the ports and I use a spare patch cable to make sure the solution gets worked in really well, and it's got alcohol in it so it dries by itself so I don't have to worry about cleanup. Then I'm going to start testing out my layout. I haven't put dual lock on the bottom of the pedals yet so that I can just put them on the board with painter's tape just to kind of make sure my spacing and placement of everything is correct, and I can start the process of hard mounting certain things into the board. So here I've got a little hole punch and I'm just marking out where I'm going to drill my holes to hard mount this riser plate for my volume pedal. I don't have a garage or shop to work in right now. I'm doing this whole project in my living room, so I'm just using these cardboard boxes to lift up the pedal board anytime I need to do some drilling, and an added benefit is the boxes catch all the debris. As with any project, you want to start with the smallest pilot bit you have and incrementally work your way up to the appropriate size to avoid any unintentional damage. One thing to note is I didn't mount the pedal riser all the way in the back left corner because two things I have to consider are how I'm going to mount the pedals on the riser so they're most secure and balanced, and also the added depth and or width that patch cables plugged into them will add. So you'll notice the back riser is inset just a little bit. You'll also notice the middle row of pedals are on their own little risers from fixed pedal boards. I'm not using any kind of a loop switchers, so I need to be able to easily access the foot switches on those pedals. Now I'm going to start carefully mounting all of my pedals and my power supply onto the board. Notice I have unfinished cables plugged into the pedals to account for the space that they will need. And usually I mount both sides of the dual lock onto the bottom of the pedal first, and then peel off the adhesive cover right before I place the pedal where I want it to go on the board. I did the opposite with the power supply for some reason. It just made sense to me in the moment. One way is not necessarily better or worse than the other. Now we have all of our pedals mounted, including my volume pedal that is screwed in from the bottom. I'm doing this weird thing where I'm covering up any parts where the dual lock adhesive is exposed underneath the board because I'm weird and don't like the idea of them just collecting dust. Now it's time to work on power. As you can see with blue painter's tape and a Sharpie, I've marked every pedal for where it's going to go into the power supplies, just numbered from left to right. You might notice some of them have the same number on them. That's because they're sharing power, because those are low power consumption pedals. So I'm going to be soldering some Y splitter cables at the power supply for those. And now with my label maker, I'm labeling each output of the power supplies for what pedals that output is powering. So the method for doing this, especially if you want a really compact pedal board, is I have the stock right angle plugs that came on the cables already plugged into the pedals, so I know that they're secure and have sufficient room. And then I'm tracing the cable's most sensible path back to the power supply. Thinking of it sort of like a river or stream coming from the power supply that then branches off to each individual pedal. So I'm running the cable from the pedal back to the power supply, so I already know the exact cable length I need. I'm cutting off the excess cable and soldering on a new end plug right there at the power supply. As I get those cables in place, I secure them to the board with zip ties and zip tie anchors, so whether traveling or being used on stage, those cables aren't going anywhere. After I've done all the power cables and tested everything, it's time to move on to audio. Conventional wisdom suggests you start with the very last thing in your signal chain and then work your way backwards so you can test at every step in the process. So off to the side, I've got my cable tester and two cables that I plug into my output and the most recently wired up pedal, and just turn it on to make sure a signal is successfully passing through the board. Beyond this, it's just a lot of soldering and cable management and testing. Really the big difference maker in putting together a clean, professional pedal board like this that travels well and holds together is going in with a game plan. It's really 70% planning and 30% execution. But if you're willing to do the work and you know how to solder and keep all your cables organized, you could very easily build a pedal board like this for yourself. All right, Penelope, here it is, the pedal board completely done. I thought I'd give you a quick rundown of how the whole thing's set up. Does that sound good?
Oh, okay.
So guitar plugs straight into the fuzz pedal on the bottom right corner. I am now plugging my guitar directly into the fuzz rather than into a buffer and then into the fuzz, so purists can be happy about that. So this is a new fuzz pedal for me. It's the T4 by Brown Amplification, and I'm really liking it. It's based on a Big Muff fuzz circuit without the mid scoop that a lot of those pedals do, and it's really fun to play. It's nice to have a fuzz pedal that almost qualifies as a third drive option. So for my clean tone, then after the fuzz, we're going to go underneath the pedal board. We're going to come back up to the Earthquaker Devices Spatial Delivery envelope filter. Previously, it was after the compressor, but putting it before the compressor gives it more dynamic range, so the filter can be a little more sensitive. And that was all just from my right hand with the intensity of my picking attack on the strings. Then after the envelope filter, we're going to go underneath the riser that is conveniently locked in place by little thumb screws. And it's going to go into this one's mine buffered splitter. It's going to buffer the signal. It's also going to split out to the always on tuner. And then it's going to carry on to the Bloom compressor. Still a great compressor slash EQ slash boost. Still flipping through all the different compression modes depending on the song. Then from the compressor over to the sub and up. Penelope, what color is this?
Red.
That's right. And it does the octave thing. Or I could give it a little bit more. Then from the sub and up, we're going to move pretty linearly down to the Golden Boy and then across this whole row of pedals. Golden Boy by Jackson Audio, still my absolute go-to for most drive needs. And with the gain cycling. And the boost. So just really great, covers a lot of ground. After that, the Walrus Audio 385 for a different flavor of drive. And then combining that with the boost. Then after the 385, we're on to the Native Audio Pretty Bird Woman chorus and vibrato for just all of my modulation needs. Then after that, the Sneak Attack, the ridiculously over-engineered tremolo pedal by Maleko. And I just love the fact that I have complete control over the shape of how it modulates, so I can get into like weird territory like or go the opposite way and do something like so all sorts of possibilities there. After the Sneak Attack, we go back under the board, follow along back to the volume pedal. Couple of cool things happening here. It's hard mounted into the board, so it's not going anywhere, and it's on top of this little riser plate made by Best-Tronics Pro Audio. That does a couple of things. It prevents the side-to-side wobble that can sometimes happen with volume pedals when they're on Velcro or dual lock. It also raises it up slightly because this is my first ever flat pedal board. I'm used to using volume pedals on angled boards, so I appreciate the extra height. Another interesting thing happening here is I discovered that I have a tendency to put my weight on the volume pedal a little bit when I use it, and that was actually causing the board to bend a little bit. So I got some little wood blocks, I spray painted them black, and got some grips that they put on the bottom of furniture feet, and just put them underneath where the volume pedal is just to support the pedal board a little bit so the board doesn't bow over time. Then from the volume pedal, we jump over to the DoD rubberneck analog delay. I've got it just doing some warm, slightly pitch modulated repeats. And this is a really fun pedal to use live. These two lights are actually knobs, and they control what happens when you hold down either of these foot switches. This is the rubberneck feature. It just modulates the time of the repeats. And this knob is just another setting for the feedback. So I have it set to almost full. So if I hold down this foot switch, the pedal will just freak out. So that's super fun. After that, making its triumphant return to the board, the Chase Bliss Mood ambient effects and micro looper, really fun for glitchy stuff or making a wall of sound. A lot of times I'll just do a swell and then like latch a pad on the micro looper. So the left side is some reverb and echo effects, and the right side is a micro looper, which is different than a standard looper that you can stop and start. This is always listening, and so if I hit this foot switch, it'll just play back what it just heard for the last few seconds. So if I go... and then I can mess with it in some really weird ways, like... and then put it through the wet effects on the left side. This will also be kind of a pedal du jour spot on the board depending on the gig or the set or just what's inspiring me at the moment. It's also the last pedal before I go into my amp sim, the Walrus Audio ACS-1. So if I want to put on, say, a true stereo effect like my beloved Dimension C chorus, it's really easy to just put another little patch cable right here and be wired in true stereo. The placement of these two pedals on the board is also a really intentional design choice. So I've had some guitar gigs recently where the monitoring situation was less than ideal. They were outdoor and we were on wedges. It was kind of a festival style throw and go type thing. And so it made sense for me to bring a real amp, if nothing else, just for being able to hear myself on stage. So it got me thinking it'd be really great to have the ability to patch out of the board right before the ACS-1. So if I want to run a real amp on stage just as a monitor, I can do that and still send the sound of the ACS-1, which I really like, to front of house. So I can have an AB splitter right here next to the board, come out of this pedal, split off to a real amp that will be getting a dry signal, and then still come into the ACS-1 and send that through my wet effects up here and straight to front of house. So this opens up some really cool possibilities for my live guitar sound. Save for these two pedals, if I split out before the ACS-1, I'm bypassing these two pedals up here, so I'm sending a dry guitar sound to the real amp on stage. So there's a few ways I could run this. I could turn off the ACS-1 and send the whole board to a real amp, or I could split out right before the ACS-1, send the guitar sound dry to the real amp to use that as a monitor, and still send this, along with these two effects, stereo or mono, to front of house. So they have the board sound and I have the amp sound just for me to be able to hear myself. Or if the sound engineer wants to mic up that amp, they're effectively getting a wet, dry, or a wet, dry, wet guitar sound. So that gives me a lot of flexibility as far as how I want to run my amps on stage. ACS-1 running 2 amps in stereo even when I'm in mono because I like the sound of 2 amps stacked together. Come stereo out of that pedal, back under the board following along that same path, but then up to underneath the riser to my simple switch stereo summing box. By the way, with this board, I switched from the Fender engine room power supplies, which are great power supplies, to the Strymon stuff, just simply because they're slightly smaller, and with a pedal board this compact, every square inch is precious. So after the stereo sum, we come up to the riser, first into the Boss DD500. This pedal used to be before the ACS-1, but now it's after, just simply because I didn't want to make the wiring of this board even more complicated. I just had to adjust the mix on my presets, and I did a slight bit of filtering on the global onboard EQ on the DD500, and it sounds and reacts the exact same as before. Then DD500 into the Big Sky, out of the Big Sky, back under the riser, and over to the Walrus Audio canvas, and that's where all my outputs are. I even picked up a couple of black right angle plugs to blend in with the canvas. And finally, the Selah Quartz, sending program changes to the Big Sky, the DD500, changing some settings on the Golden Boy depending on the song, and sending tap tempo to the Sneak Attack. One really cool thing that I'm shocked and a little bit ashamed that I didn't figure out until recently is that in the Selah Quartz, you can actually customize per song what the subdivision of the tap tempo it's sending out is, because sometimes on, say, slower songs, I'll want the tremolo to move at an 1/8 note, and then on faster songs, a 1/4 note, or maybe depending on the song, want it to be a triplet or some other odd rhythm. And I realized I could leave the subdivision knob on the Sneak Attack just set to 1/4 note all the time, and then change per song what the subdivision is of the tap that's being sent out. So it's one more thing I just never have to think about. And another great thing about this setup is, compared to the last pedal board, it's much easier to convert from mono to stereo when I want to do that, because all of the patch cables I need to add happen on the back of the pedal board. I even went ahead and custom made the 3 patch cables I would need to do that. All right, Penelope, I think that covers the entire pedal board. Did we forget anything?
Yes.
What did we forget?
You we forget the picture.
Oh, you're right. We have to do that and one other thing. Let's go. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe and do all the other stuff. I'm Jason. Love you guys.